In today's Qualified at the Intersection, I'm going to talk about another strategy because yesterday I talked about some legal strategies related to the workplace, and now I want to talk about legal strategies related to education. So, some of you may know that many of the red states are aggressively trying to remove any conversation about race from education, from K through 12 to the university level. But I want to focus on K through 12 because I think that's where parents can have the most impact. A long time ago, I used to do Tai Chi a lot. And in Tai Chi, you want to use the energy. You don't want to push back. You want to use the energy to destabilize your opponent. So you want to use their energy. And I think this is something that parents could do as it relates to some of these efforts. So Florida and Oklahoma are two examples I'll talk about in the written part of this newsletter below, but both of them have engaged in these really bizarre attempts to rewrite history. In Oklahoma, they want to teach the students that Donald Trump had the election stolen from him and that there were questions and that it's a matter of opinion as to whether Joe Biden really was elected. And none of that is true. None of that is true. But they want to teach that to students. But both states also use very similar, and I assume this is language thought up by a think tank somewhere, which goes to the point that we need think tanks somewhere providing the standard language for the rest of us. But the language says, they have a law banning any instruction that causes students discomfort about race or gender. So what I think is interesting there is we can fight that law, but I also would be interested in seeing parents of color and white parents using that law. In other words, the way we currently teach American history gives discomfort to Black, Hispanic, Native children, and young women around race and gender. Let's think about that. So when we look at American history books, most scholars will say we are teaching a jingoistic version of history, meaning it's a story. It's not really always based on facts. It is meant to glorify history, but it's not actually factual. So what if we brought some legal challenges to the current history instruction books? Some of the stories that are designed to show that the way the West was won was noble and manifest destiny. Well, that makes you feel bad. If you are a native indigenous person to this country, Texas had this incident where McGraw-Hill called formerly enslaved people workers. You have to be careful of things like that. We can't say who enslaved people, just that they were enslaved. The way American history is designed, you would believe if you were a Black child in the class that you had no role in anything, you did not contribute anything, your only status has ever been slavery. So that makes, let's see here, discomfort about race or gender. So what I would love to see us do is mount Tai Chi style legal efforts, especially in this educational space, kind of like a modern day Brown v. Board of Education, but really about these specific formulaic legislation that they are passing in these states. And, in Florida, they tried to extend it to the workplace, and a lot of people didn't track that. That was struck down because it is a First Amendment issue for an employer. You can't abridge speech like that for an employer. So that's something that we also need to remember in our workplaces around the country, especially people who are complying in advance to executive orders that are likely going to be found to be illegal. But back to the educational system, I think there is this incredibly strong argument to be made, legal argument, for the families of Black children, Hispanic, Latinx children, Native children, and Asian children, and others to go into court and say, look, this is not an adequate representation of history. It is designed to elevate the white race. Now, part of this is that whiteness in all of these pieces of legislation is not assumed to be a race, right? Whiteness is assumed to be the standard. And when they say they're talking about race, they mean we don't want to talk about Black race. We want to talk about other races and how they feel about the racism that was done to them. But whiteness somehow comes out as neutral, as a neutrality. And that is something that also needs to be challenged in court. That whiteness is not neutral, and that our current historical story, our history books, what we are teaching children, promotes one race over the other. And that race is the white race. And I think we ought to use their legislation against them. Use the legislation against them legally. Find strong, good test cases. Find some of these history books out there that are saying different types of things. Find some teachers who are teaching some things and get some test cases to bring using their own legislation. I think it's an interesting approach, and it's the approach they're doing. I mean, when you look at what Stephen Miller is doing in the employment space, he's using the EEOC to use it against inclusion. They're trying to use civil rights laws and Title VII against inclusion. So they have figured this out, right? Now, the executive orders, as I say, many of them are likely going to be found to be illegal, especially as it relates to private employers. But there are things around education that they can do. And there are some executive orders that he can, in fact, enact. So if they are going to use Title VII, the EEOC, civil rights legislation, why don't we use their crazy legislative imperatives, things that may be law, maybe they're just still legislative ideas. Why don't we use those against them? Why don't we push those and let the weight of their own folly invalidate them? Because I think there are strong arguments to be made. I mean, I remember being a kid in school, and the way history is taught, you just think as a Black person, you don't exist other than slavery. You haven't done anything. Maybe they mentioned George Washington Carver, and that's it. And there are many things that have been found to be in history books that are factually inaccurate. They're just not true. Now, if you're trying to tell a jingoistic story that's just a rah-rah, the United States is great, but you're not telling the truth, then we can complain about that, because that is designed to make you feel bad about your race and gender. I mean, if we don't tell the truth about the fact that women, let's say, were forced out of their jobs at the end of World War II, they didn't just leave. They were violently pushed out of their jobs. That we had universal health care in the United States during World War II to allow women to work. And if we would not have forced them off their jobs and ended that, we would be 80 years into a society that had always had universal child care. How about that? How about that? That is a true historical fact, but you're not going to find that in a history book. So then throw the whole book out. Throw the entire history book out if we're trying to make sure it doesn't cause students discomfort about race or gender. Throw the whole book out. And I think we can legally make that argument. So I am saying that we need financial resources to do this kind of work, because I think it is very important, because they're whitewashing history. They're changing history. They're trying to get rid of the fact that race existed. And what is all of this? It's not about colorblind. It's about setting up a situation where your marginalization is justified. Oh, they're just lazy. They're just stupid. They've never tried. We don't talk about Oklahoma bombing, about the race-based elements of Black Wall Street being destroyed, and the fact that historical generational wealth was diverted. You can't learn that. All you learn is these people don't have anything just because they just don't try. That's what you learn. You don't learn the rest. That learning that in absence makes discomfort around race for a Black child. So I think that's important. I think parents need to band together, just like they have been doing, trying to ban books. Well, parents need to band together and say, we're going to be banning books. The first book we're going to ban is the history book that my kid learns out of, unless we get a book that is more accurately reflective of true American history. Otherwise, this book is designed to promote one race, and that is the white race over others. That is an argument we can make legally, we can make morally, and we must make soon, because these folks are running the table, and we need to fund a legal resistance to do this. And I think we can do it. So that's the newsletter today.